Welcome to Tech Talk. We are talking winches. Let's get into it. So welcome to Tech Talk, guys. We are getting into winches, as you can tell. I brought Dave along from Atico, and obviously we want to break down what is a winch, what does it do, what is the right winch for me, and how to use one, and a whole bunch of little questions that I hear daily out there that people want to know. So first question, what is a winch?
Great question. All right. So what is a winch? It's a self-recovery device for your vehicle or a cheap insurance policy, depending on where you're going.
True that. I can definitely attest to that part of it.
Yes.
So that's what it basically is in a nutshell. But how does it all work?
Yeah. So winches are really simple. Essentially, you've got a series wound motor. Mm-hmm. You've got a drivetrain running through the middle. Yep. You've got a gearbox with gearbox reduction. Mm-hmm. Depending on the size of the winch, the gearbox varies in the reduction gears. You've got a clutch to activate and deactivate the gearbox. You've got a drum, which holds approximately 25 metres of rope. Yep. You've got a contactor relay on top, which is the brains of the winch, which makes it go in and out, similar to a relay on a lighting system or something like that. You've got a switch, turns it on, turns it off. You get all the wiring to hook it all up. It mounts typically to a bull bar on the front of your car. There is some options to mount it in other places as well, as we see. So that's basically a winch. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple piece of gear.
Over the years, we've seen many changes to like how a winch operates.
We've seen a lot of evolution. Probably in the last 10 years, winches have really gone in a whole new direction. In the 80s and 90s, we looked at 8,000 pounds, 9,000 pounds.
Got a lot bigger.
That was all we had, right? Probably 2007, 2010, things started changing. People wanted more performance. They wanted bigger size. Then came the question of, well, how do we make these things waterproof? Then the waterproofing came, and essentially companies have evolved really quickly. And what you're looking at now is sort of cutting edge, really good products, and that's what we're here to talk about today.
Yeah, so just real quickly on that waterproofing, I can tell you I have had a winch that I have pulled apart to do some maintenance. And the gasket was gone and it leaked. I was surprised that not all winches are waterproof. That's the first thing I was like, wow.
It's a very good question. So for years, most winches had no waterproofing, right? So the old XD9000s, the old Super Winch, etc. No waterproofing, didn't really matter too much. Now we've got a few ratings. So there's two available, and you can Google them and look them up. But typically you've got what we call IP67.
Yep.
Okay. A few winches out there, brand new winches, IP67 rated, etc. What that means really is if I grab a bucket of water, pour a bucket of water over my winch, it's pretty good. It's not going to get water in it. All right. Second rating.
I'm going underwater.
If you're going underwater, and I've seen you drive, second rating is what we call IP68. Now, much harder to get. The testing criteria for that is technically 1.1 metres of water depth, 45 minutes, but static. So essentially what we do is we drop this winch as it is, 1.5 metres of water. We leave it for 45 minutes, we pull it back out, and we pull it apart, and we check to see if there's any water ingress. And you've got to do that multiple times with multiple batches of winches. That gives you what we call IP68 rating. Now there's only a very small handful of winches that have IP68. All these are, that you guys sell. Other brands, they get around it by saying their winches are waterproof, but they might only have one component of the winch that's maybe IP68 or IP67, but the rest of it isn't. These models here, everything on it is IP68.
Wow, so while we're talking numbers, obviously that's one of the secret numbers that's not spoken about enough. Like, what about the gearing? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so gearing, typically on a winch, you're looking at about 212-to-1 reduction. When you're talking about some of your cheaper winches out there, which, as we know on performance figures, sometimes they get fudged a little bit, they may have a bigger gear ratio, like a 260-to-1 or something like that, to compensate for the pull. But generally speaking, modern winches are all around that 220-to-1 ratio. The early ones, like you'd remember the old XP 9.5s, the real fast WARNs, they were down as low as maybe 150-to-1, and that's what gave them that line speed. So what gearing does in relationship to the actual winch motors, if you've got a deeper gear ratio, it generally doesn't draw as much power. And that's how they get around with the efficiency of the winch. So if you have a really fast line speed, you're going to be drawing a lot of current, which is not great on modern vehicles.
I know a lot of the comp guys are all about the speed, but in your generalisation, you need that balance.
You need a balance, yeah. And you also need the gearing to move, to pull the truck out of the bog.
Talk to me about the braking system.
Yeah, so...
You never hear about it. I want to hear about it.
Yeah, good question. Really important. With brakes, there's a couple of types.
Yep.
There's what we call a spring brake, which is some springs pushing pads up onto the drum. So this is the drum running through here.
Yep.
And typically the brake's inside the drum. A lot of the models in the premium segment use what they call a cone brake, which is actually a full diameter brake which sits in the middle. The cone brakes hold the weight a lot better and a bit safer. Spring brakes work, but they're prone to having some more wear and tear as they get older. So generally the cheaper winches using spring brakes, more expensive options are using cone brakes, which last a bit longer.
I need to know when I'm at the Cape, I've gone underwater, I've come out of the water, I've used it. On that day, all I want to know is this going to work? And a cone braking system is going to give you that more reliability yourself.
Yeah, and while we're talking about brakes, you raised a good question. We also need to know what size winch you should have in your car.
Yeah, well, I didn't realise for a long time that I've always gone the biggest I can get.
Yeah.
But the right balance is I've got a very light 79 now. It's not heavy, I'm not towing. So what's the right winch for me? I get asked all the time. For me, I've got a lightweight car. For someone else, they've got a very heavy and the towing caravan these days.
Typically, we've got 3 sizes available.
Yep.
We've got 8 and 9,000 pound, which is your traditional size, which we talked about earlier, being available. Then we have typically a 10,000.
Yeah.
And now we're pushing into 12s and above. So 12s, 13s, that sort of size.
I'm running a 12.
Yeah. So how do we work that out? Rule of thumb that we apply is 1.5 times your GVM. So if your car goes across the weighbridge and it weighs 2,200 kilos,
that's pretty simple though.
1.5 times. So if we look at a 9,000 pound VRS, it's about 4,200 kilos, single line pull, all right?
Yeah.
So if your car weighs 2 tonne, you're within the spec.
That's
now,
pretty simple.
if you're close, if you do the maths and you're pretty close, step up to the next size.
So if I've got a 200 and a caravan, I'm going somewhere alone, I need to be at that 12.5 then?
Most likely, yeah. We would recommend it, anything bigger than your dual cabs.
Yep.
So your dual cab 79s, 79 single cabs, 200 series, definitely in 12,000 pound territory.
Why would I bother doing a 9.5? I mean, so is if I went to put a 9.5 on my single cab, would that be quicker?
Good question. Differences between a 9 and a 12. So if you can have a look here, physical size of a 12 is bigger.
Yeah, so I've got to be able to fit it in.
You've got to be able to fit it in. A really important thing to remember is check with your bull bar manufacturer to make sure it can take a 12,000 pound, because some bars are only rated to a 10.
I've had bull bars in the past that have twisted, and I've been near vertical winching, and I didn't know at the time that how that connection, the bull bar and the winch are not all that compatible. Now we fixed it by straightening things up later, but I didn't realise until that day when I'm in trouble and my bull bar's twisted, why?
Yeah, because obviously, the winch is pulling it at a really, really high end level or a high number, and maybe your bull bar mounts aren't rated for that, and suddenly you get some chassis twisting. Modern cars are all about pedestrian safety and all these other things. So the front ends are very soft now compared to what, say, an old 80 series was that you could just throw something on and go to town on,
Yeah, you're all done.
So yeah, what are the differences between, say, a 10,000 and a 12? 12,000 pound, your gearing's a little lower, so it will be slower line speeds, but it will be a little bit more efficient. So in terms of you'll get a bit more line speed out of a 10, a little bit less out of your 12. Other than a little bit extra weight in terms of the physical size of the winch, the brake's a little bigger to handle the ratings for the 12. Cable's generally a little bit thicker on a 12,000 pound. So with that in mind, typically we get around 24 metres of usable length on a winch of rope.
Okay,
right? On something like a 12, you might get 21 metres because your cable is thicker.
Yep.
All right, so just another thing to keep in mind, If you're stepping up to a 12, even though you don't need it, you won't get as much line length to winch from. But there is not that many negatives to going to a bigger winch, particularly if you are likely to have a trailer.
Installation. A lot of guys wanting to do it at home. We do a lot here. Can I install this at home? What's the best way to do this?
Yeah, look, to be honest, it's really simple. I mean, if you can connect a positive and a negative wire, and you can physically lift the winch into the bull bar, cradle, and that sort of stuff at home, by all means, you could do it yourself. It's not particularly technical, but as always, it's good to get a workshop to do it, to check over things, to make sure it's working, peace of mind. But yeah, it's something that if you can turn a spanner and you like working on your cars, a winch installation is very straightforward.
I found that we get a lot of winches in the shop that guys bring in, or we obviously sell a top quality brand. Often the cheaper ones don't have the length I need, the control box can't be moved. There's a bit of troubleshooting when installing a winch to a unique bull bar or something different, particularly when you don't have all the components.
Yeah, one of the things you'll find with the more reliable brands on the marketplace and the brands that are more common, most bull bar manufacturers have done test fits for those products.
Yeah.
For example, we send winches to a lot of bull bar manufacturers like Unique, etc. They do test fits. They make sure it fits. So the bars will, their bars will fit.
And it's rated to that.
Exactly. Cheap winches, like you said, sometimes the control box can't be removed. The bracketry is different. It's made for
to make so many custom brackets. It's had to be done to get it on there. So I just know it's sometimes frustrating.
Yeah, and even things like, bolts getting stripped when you take them off and stuff like that. It's just, problematic.
Yeah, I'm not harping on the cheaper brands too much, but I've had to pull the gearbox out. Day one, it didn't work. Yeah. So I know that if I know what I'm doing, I've got a little bit of logic about me. It wasn't hard to do. Yeah. But typically speaking, I don't get the letdown of other bigger brands.
Yeah, and I mean, using a good workshop to install, they're going to take the time to spool it on properly, make sure it all works, and everything should be hunky-dory for your trip or whenever you go to use it first time.
But as long as I connect to the main battery.
Main battery, yep.
I got the right weight for the bull bar.
Yes.
I got the right size for my vehicle. I can definitely do this at home.
Yeah, exactly. There is some tricks though, and I'll point them out. Gearboxes typically can be rotated, so as it sits, it's vertical. Say the winch had to be mounted feet up, you can easily rotate the gearboxes.
Just disconnect it and spin it.
On these winches. Some of your cheaper winches you can't.
I can tell you that it's very difficult when this is on the back end and not on the top when I've had to rotate. So
yeah. So again, double check when you're buying. Make sure your gearbox can be rotated and it's going to fit in the bar. All
right, let's talk about the weight. So we're talking about the weights, the pulling. Some brands out there have a lighter weight winch. What's the story there?
Yeah, look, typically all the winches that are on the marketplace are going to weigh between 28 kilos to 35 kilos. We don't see much variation. I have heard of some lighter stuff, but at the end of the day, most winches are around that 28 kilos with the synthetic rope.
A lot of guys are chasing the GVM problem on the 200. So I often hear how much the bull bar weigh, how much the winch weigh. Yeah. So they're not really talking much difference between brands.
Not really. We see probably 5 kilos difference between brands, if that. Some of
as you get bigger?
Yeah, as you get bigger in 12,000s, you'll add a little bit extra weight. That's talking about synthetic rope. Obviously a steel cable winch, you've got that extra 15 kilos. So if someone's talking about a steel cable and they want to lighten it up, they can switch to the synthetic rope. To be honest, we haven't really seen too much difference in weights of winches. Typically, they're between 28 to 35 kilos. Synthetic rope, we're talking, of course. Yeah. Steel cable, obviously, an extra 15 kilos. There's a lot more weight. It's going to make very little difference to the front of your vehicle. I mean, people aren't out there with scales measuring them. We know what's in a winch and we know what components are in them. We have in the past tried to look at doing like really lightweight stuff like sub 20 kilo with aluminium housings and things, but it just gets...
Would it have the integrity?
It's very hard to get it and it's very expensive. So again, it's probably not something that's realistic to be able to make a winch that light. And typically if someone's going to do it, probably WARN's going to do it before anybody else. And so far we haven't seen anything like that.
Yeah, well, it's a good question I get asked. I've just never come across that before, but I get asked, it's like, where's this coming from? Because honestly, the right weight, the right design, the integrity, I just want to get out of trouble, but I just feel if it's getting lighter in physical weight that it just doesn't have the integrity, and that's what I'm nervous about.
Yeah, hard question to answer without thorough testing, but as I said, typical weights of winches are 25 to 35 kilos.
So let's just rattle off some do's and don'ts really quickly of just winching.
Yeah, so don't pressure wash. Big one. No need to spray any water in there under pressure. No need to, get in there with any gurneys, no force. Just give it a nice clean if it's got mud on it. You don't want to be spraying any grit and stuff inside the seals and things like that. A good do, run the winch occasionally. We talked about maintain it. You don't have to pull it apart and do anything crazy. Just run it every 3 months or so. A really good tip, when you first get home, learn how to use it. Hook it all up. Work out what buttons does what. Work out if you can reach the plug, all that sort of stuff.
Be confident in it before you go out and use it.
Yeah, go to a campground, set it up, work out what gear you need. Another good do have recovery gear.
So I can't use a winch without recovery gear?
You definitely need recovery gear.
Obviously, some of the real quick, what do we got here?
Yeah, so this is a basic winch recovery kit. So you got things like gloves, you got cable dampeners, you got tree trunk protector. So obviously you hook the cable up around a tree. You can get a couple of different lengths in that. Standard is about 3.5 meters. You can get longer ones for depending on the application.
I was just at Coughs. I can tell you Chris had a 5 meter.
Yeah.
And I had a 3 meter, and we're using Chris's 5 meter.
It's all about length.
It is all about the length there.
You've got a snatch block, which will give you a double line pull option. Yeah, and again, when we were talking about the length of cable you have on your winch, so it's typically about 24 meters. It's always good to have an extra 20, just in case that tree is just too far for you to be able to winch it with the right amount of cable.
Good recovery gear, 100%. I often run 2, but if you don't have a blanket, you're insane. Gloves are great, and just
learn how to use it. Yeah, learn how to use the recovery gear. Don't be embarrassed by going to your local campsite set up, or even in your driveway if you're on a rural property or something. It's really important to know how to use this stuff before you're hanging off the side of a mountain going, what do I do?
That's it. I mean, they're the core do's and don'ts.
Yeah, core do's and don'ts. Don't pressure wash, use your winch, learn how to use your gear, and you should be able to do just about anything.
I think that's the key with winching. It's just out there. What is it? How does it work? What's the right one for me? And what are some of the problems I'm going to come across? They're the keys of just winching and knowing what it is. I'm so passionate about getting out there. I just want other people to know what to use, what don't you need to do, what you need to do. There's a lot of stuff out there. So honestly, just thank you heaps for coming out, just running through it. I learned a bunch of stuff today, particularly about the lengths and the waterproofing, which has affected me. I have broken more than one winch. I've slowly scaled up to the top end. If I ever need to go alone, I'm very confident I can get myself out of trouble. And mate, just thank you, big one for today.
Yeah, no worries.
Appreciate it. Guys, if you want to ask any questions in the comments below, just ask away. We'll get in there, comment or answer those questions. Hit us up, but thank you for tuning in. This is Winches 101 Tech Talk. Check it out. Catch you later.